Hi, I'm Mike Vance. I'm the content director of the Brenham Heritage Museum, and we thought with people locked inside their houses or at least limited in their scope of travel and not able to come to the museum, we'd bring a little Brenham history to you. Because there's such an incredible connection between the stories of yellow fever and the stories of what we're going through right now, I thought that I'd share something today that's from a paper that I've written. It's something that you'll see in the exhibits when we get the brand new museum reopened in a year or two. And it's an important story for Texas, for Brenham, and for all of the southern United States. It's about yellow fever. And I'll read the opening paragraph. The politicians told reporters that talk of mass sickness was a hoax, even as morgues filled to capacity. They assured everyone that it was perfectly safe to go about their normal routines and spend the usual amounts of money. Quarantines were instituted between one municipality and another. Immigrants, already viewed with skepticism by many, were turned away when the disease was rampant. Some bigwigs threatened reporters and doctors who dared tell the public that an epidemic was afoot. That was not today, folks. That was in the 19th century. And in terms of sheer numbers, when we're talking about yellow fever, no place approached the catastrophes felt in New Orleans. It was, after all, 4 times larger than any other city in the South, and still the numbers are just staggering. The worst stretch for New Orleans saw more than 16,000 deaths over 3 years, starting in 1853. At the outset of that first summer, local doctors there promised that yellow fever epidemic was an obsolete idea. And yet, on the single day of August 21st of that year, New Orleans had more than 300 burials. Texas had outbreaks all the way back to the Austin colony. The biggest one in Texas, that was right after the Republic started, was in 1839, and there were at least 9 others that popped up between 1839 and the middle of the Civil War. But fate saved its worst for Southeast Texas for the summer of 1867. Federal troops occupied the region. They were here integrating the freed slaves into society, trying to keep the peace, and overseeing a reestablishment of trade after the war. The first known yellow fever case arrived via ship from Veracruz, landing at the port of Indianola on Matagorda Bay in early July. Soon cases of the fever had popped up in Corpus Christi, where scarcely a house in the city escaped, and in Galveston, where long lists of dead were published in the daily news. General Charles Granger was in charge of the U.S. soldiers on the island. In spite of recommendations from his staff that Galveston be quarantined, he left all commerce intact. Within weeks, Granger himself was dead of the fever. As the disease ramped up, about 5,500 of the town's 22,000 residents fled inland to escape infection, but perhaps as many as 2,000 of those remaining perished. That approached 15% of the island's population at that point. Many among the refugees were already carrying yellow fever, of course, and hungry insects waited to transfer it to others, though doctors and people at the time had no idea how the disease was actually spread. They thought it was spread by a miasma, by bad air, by vapors that at least led to them sanitizing some of the streets and, in some cases, draining some of the swamp water, which was a breeding ground for those mosquitoes, though they hadn't made that connection. The first case in Houston that summer was acknowledged by the press in late August. By the end of September, roughly 700 Houstonians, more than 10% of the citizenry, had succumbed to it. That included more than a third of the American soldiers who were in the city on active duty. Numbers were similar everywhere, including towns farther inland that were more used to welcoming those who fled the coast than to dealing with an outbreak themselves. That means Brenham. Also places like Hempstead, Anderson, LaGrange, Huntsville. In 1867, all of those cities had a death toll near 10% of their population. Fully half of the residents of Navasota tried to flee to safety, and many of them fell dead on the road. With so many of those epidemic years, longtime residents knew that the odds of avoiding infection with yellow fever were slim. Though they might not enjoy thinking about it, the best they could realistically hope for was to get sick and survive. People along the Gulf Coast referred to it as becoming acclimated. They meant immunity, and they were well aware that those not from around here did not fare well. Settlers from Northern Europe were especially hard hit. Newspapers, doctors, and locals cautioned those, and I'm quoting here, who have never had the yellow fever to remain away until we say come home. By returning before frost, you not only jeopardize your own lives, but keep the fever among us. The editor of Houston's Telegraph and Texas Register was melancholy as he watched a shipload of new arrivals from Germany travel through town, full of health and blood, he said, ruddy of face and strong of limb, knowing soon that in Galveston, Houston, or Brenham, the yellow fever might get among them. The situation was so well known that many businesses refused to hire anyone who could not prove their acclimation. Why should they invest time and money in a worker who would soon be dead? The people who were acclimated made perfect nurses because they were immune, and a lot of times those people were in great demand. Cities would write to other cities and try to get help when the epidemic got to them and overwhelmed them. We're going to close with a letter here from Dr. John P. Key of Brenham, who wrote a letter to his fellow physician, Dr. William McRaven, in Houston on September 12th of that year, 1867. Within a week, it had made it into the local press in Houston. Though Dr. Key was admittedly new to the yellow fever business, he'd never treated it before, his words were in earnest, and they conveyed that he was both desperate and bone-tired. "Dear Sir," wrote Dr. Key, "though personally unacquainted with you, I feel justified at taking the liberty of addressing you in behalf of suffering humanity and the Catholic character of our profession. This locality is now and has been suffering for some weeks from a disease of a most malignant type. I think it quite likely that many cases which have occurred in this town would, had they been met with in a locality in which yellow fever was an epidemic, have been diagnosed as yellow fever. 3 cases of yellow fever, all fatal and having black vomit, have been met with in this place in subjects recently from Galveston. One of those cases died in a bake shop, the backyard of which adjoined 2 other tenements from which each of I had a patient. 2 of the 4 physicians in this place are sick, both cases caused by overexertion. Is it possible that we can get any capable professional assistance from the faculty at your place? I should say that at least 2 more physicians could get full employment here for at least 2 months. I have not attended to 1/4 of the cases I have had, and for the last few days, not 1 in 10. So the doctors in Brenham were overwhelmed. Dr. McRaven in Houston himself was sick when the letter arrived, which was the reason that it got forwarded to the newspaper. He was hoping to alert the town of Houston to Brenham's needs. And he added a personal note that the nurses could likely be spared because Houston's epidemic looked to be mild. Dr. McRaven was dead wrong about that. The Bayou City lost 10% of its citizens to death from fever that year in 1867, and so did Brenham. Not happy news, not happy history, but I hope it was informative, and I hope you enjoyed it. We'll try to get some more videos out to you because we know Washington County loves its history. Thanks very much.